shared connections with some of you here. And in fact, as we talk about my story, it's kind of funny that a lot of the things that happened at IIT had, repercussions and reverberations many years down the road in many of the things that I ended up doing and the people I ended up doing it with and so on. And you don't think about it, but it just, that's how life is. So I certainly remember, classmates of mine. For example, there was Vishy. I don't know if he's here, but Vishy was in every class you have one of these guys who was very conscientious note taker, right? So Vishy was one of those, like awesome notes, fabulous, and I was kind of the exact opposite. So come exam time, as you know, last minute studying and so on, right? So you want to do crash course and catch up on the whole semester and do it. And accept that, so Vishy's notes would be extremely popular. Vishy would be extremely popular. And then, so we'd organize like time slots saying we can take his notes between this slot and that slot and then somebody else gets it and so on. And then of course, Vishy would do a study during normal hours, which means then you have to catch up during abnormal hours, between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. or something like that. Or you go photocopy his notes and then you have versions of that floating around. So things like that. I mean, it just a lot of that. And many years later, when I started Gupshup, Vishy was the first person, who joined us as well. And the same thing, even at there's another person called Sanjay Narona. We used to call him Yamaha, which is a different story because his best friend was Yazdi, and I said, we can't call you Sanjay. It doesn't go well with Yazdi. It has to be Yamaha. Anyway. So yeah, he was another one of those guys, and we'd done some PAF festivals and so on. And then many years later, when I started Elance, again, the first person that joined me was Sanjay, and many sessions together. And it wasn't just all studies, right? Lots of pranks, lots of crazy stuff. I ended up getting a good rank and a good GPA, but I don't want you guys to hold that against me. Suffice it to say there were a lot of pranks and a lot of crazy stuff I used to do, and I was one of the few guys that actually had a girlfriend on campus, who now is my wife, mind you, so nothing, please, no scandalous stories out there, but no, the point is, we used to play a lot of pranks even in hostels and so on. You had these silly and petty rivalries, okay, not that we used to, at that time it was really serious, but there was like, we were in one wing and there was, in another wing, there was some other, a bunch of other students, and they were usually good sports people, so they called themselves the champs, and therefore we didn't like that, so we'd call them the chimps, and then there would be constant rivalry, and we'd do goofy things. We'd plant like an onion bomb. Do you guys know what that is? You take an onion, you put a firecracker, you cut a hole, put a firecracker in, and when it explodes sort of out there, you get the smell of burnt onion for many days. Okay. But it's really tricky to plant it, especially when the other guys are expecting you to do it. So then you have to kind of, sneakily find your way around it, or I think another time we sort of climbed up from the terrace and wrote sort of chimps, and then they changed it to champs, and then kind of kept going on and back and forth. And again, the point is, okay, it was silly stuff, goofy stuff. However, again, when I kind of draw back to many of the other strands, and even in startup life and things that you do, you're always stretching for creativity, pushing for finding an alternative path to do something. It's not simple. You're always pushing yourself, stretching yourself. So all of these things to me, they were perfect training lessons. They're perfect. It's the ideal training ground where you're competing, you're out competing, you're doing. It seems to be shortcoming, if you will, even of the IIT experience. Sometimes is the softer skills are never emphasized as much. You never have enough focus. The social skills, how do you interact with people, even things like conflict resolution, okay? I think, and I'm generalizing, but in general in Indian culture I find that people have a tough time having difficult conversations, confronting someone. While I remember my daughter, right, she was in kindergarten and she grew up in the US, we just moved back here a year ago. like right from, you know, kindergarten they're taught like, okay, don't fight, use your words. Okay, if somebody did something wrong, just say, hey, I didn't like what you did. Okay, and gives the other person a chance to react, solve the issue right there, move on. You know, out here sometimes you find things fester. Okay, I didn't like what I did, but I won't tell him. I'll do something else later, and it festers and it escalates, and then you stop talking, which is like, I don't know how that works. And then anyway, so I think lots of, you know, I think it was a great time, lots of lessons, and you know, still very, very fond memories.
So moving forward, if I could check with you, say for example, after IIT you went to did your MS, you became an investment banker, right? Which was kind of the done thing in those days, right?
Right.
And so what made you leave that, which was, I'm sure it must have been a tough job, right?
Right.
Leaving an investment banking job on a Wall Street isn't an easy task, right?
Right. So I went to grad school at MIT, and after I did that, I wanted to get business experience. And even though I was great at computer science, but I didn't see myself purely as a programmer. I thought that I rather saw myself as a problem solver. You know, I like solving problems in different domains. And I said, okay, in Wall Street in particular, there's a lot of quantitative work being done all the time. So quant skills are very useful. And you know, I ended up initially developing systems for bond trading, and ultimately even trading them myself, because, you know, as you build these securities and structures and models, you understand them better than the other traders. So I ended up doing that. Now mind you, this was in the mid 90s, okay? And then something called Netscape happened along the way. And you know, just the growth of the internet was quite explosive around that time. And I was just, what happens in Wall Street, you know, in general, there are bursts of innovative activity, right? You create new products, let's say mortgage-backed securities or derivatives or CMOs or CDOs, and I won't go into the details, but what happens is, for about 6 months or a year, when you create something new, okay, it's really exciting because you know it better than the other people, you can outcompete, so on and so forth. And then very quickly, everybody understands how these things work, and it becomes, it very quickly translates into, you know, buy low, sell high, kind of day-to-day stockbroking and trading. And it's not, I mean, yeah, it's profitable, it's lucrative, but it's not challenging, it's not stimulating. And, you know, it just, at least, and it's a subjective choice, I won't comment on anybody else's choice, but for me, it was, you know, I was a restless tinkerer. I like creating new things, challenging, finding new things that could impact a lot of other people. What you also feel sometimes on Wall Street is, are you really adding value? I mean, yeah, you're making, you know, it's lucrative again, but are you creating something new that contributes to the world at large, as opposed to just being a middleman who can find loopholes and extract value out of it? So anyway, you know, personal and a subjective choice was, you know, I wanted to do something, create something new, and I was just getting restless. So meanwhile, like I said, as the internet happened, it just provided a lot of opportunity and a lot of potential. So that's how we ended up thinking about new ideas and ultimately creating Elance. Yeah.
So what was the key thought behind Elance? Because Elance, if you look at it, was a difficult thing to do, right? When you have a site which is selling one product or one service, you have to only look at one side of the economy. But over here, you were creating a marketplace, which is a very challenging thing to do, because you've got to look at both sides of the economy, and you survive only when both the parties survive here, right? So what was the whole inspiration behind Elance?
Yeah, great question. I think, you know, so around this time, so we got started in '98, right? But so by that time, let's say, you know, content, you had Yahoo, portals like Yahoo and AOL sort of growing and doing well. You had also commerce, e-commerce had taken off. A lot of it was commerce of goods. Amazon, you know, the store, bookstore. It started with books and then went on to many more things. eBay as well had just happened, which was much more of a peer-to-peer kind of commerce model. unlike Amazon, which was B2C. So, as we looked at all of that, we felt that there was no tools or no solutions for the commerce of services. Now, if you think about it, services is a much greater part of global economy than products are, right? About 3/4 of the world economy, and an even higher percentage in the US, is services. Just virtual services. Many of them they can be virtualized, they can be done remotely. And if you think about it, the whole point of the internet, or rather one of the many applications of the internet, is that it connects, it matches, right? Which means it doesn't matter where you are, you can be connected anywhere, right? So hypothetically, could you live, I don't know, in Maldives or Hawaii and work in New York and Mumbai, right? And that was the power of the internet. And I think if you could virtualize services, if you could enable remote transactions of services, that could be huge. And if you really succeed with it, that could transform the way people work. It could transform the nature of corporations. It transforms where people live and work, how they work. What does a job mean when it's no longer 9 to 5, right? What does a job mean when you're no longer even working for one company? You're actually working for dozens of clients at different times. Are we all freelancers? Are we Elancers, right? So anyway, that's how we got started. And even there's an interesting story about the title itself. There was an interesting, just as we were creating the company and we'd launched it and launched the site and so on, there was a very seminal, influential article written by a Harvard Business School professor called The Dawn of the Elance Economy. And it's still really good. If you guys get a chance, you should go and read it. But he talked about how, as the internet enables people to come together on an as-needed basis, on demand, and work together, this will bring back the freelance economy, which, if you go back in history about 100, 200 years before, the world actually was full of artisans and guilds and individual, it was just all a freelance economy. And I think we can get back. I think the internet sort of frees you up to work for anyone, anytime, anywhere, and it really transforms the world of work. And he sort of goes on to describe how, like I said, how corporations change, what does the meaning of job changes, the meaning of income and salary and things like that, things we take for granted today, which, by the way, we take for granted, but it's only a 100, 150-year-old invention. Okay, these things didn't exist before then. So it's really transformational. And so anyway, we borrowed the name. We got him on as an advisor as well. And he was very excited that somebody was actually going to implement some of these things. So I think that's where the opportunity was. The commerce of services, it's much bigger. And so we said, okay, instead of creating yet another Me Too kind of e-commerce site, we said, let's enable the commerce of services. Also, outsourcing was just about happening, Y2K, sort of thing. Infosys was just getting started, at least in terms of its reputation and so on. So I think, and also coming from India, you could relate to the fact that there's phenomenal talent worldwide, right? They're not just in America, just all over the place. Also, given the financial background, I could relate to the fact that you can transact and trade these kind of things if you just structure it right. So I think that's how we, it was sort of a combination of a bunch of experiences that led to Elance. Yeah.
I quite like the concept of living in Maldives and working in Mumbai and New York, right? Anyway, so taking it forward, so if you could get a bit detail into, how did you decide to set up? Since you were already there in Silicon Valley, was that the reason why you decided Silicon Valley, or Silicon Valley had a specific reason why you chose to set up Elance in Silicon Valley?
So the little known fact actually is we started Elance in New York, just because that's where we were, right? I was still working, and then we were discussing, talking, and finally got started. So we rented a 2-bedroom apartment in a residential building in New York, and just got started. Next thing we knew, we were up to about 20 people, still crammed into that 2-bedroom apartment, and everybody else was wondering what the hell is going on inside, and who are all these people coming and going, and so on. So I think there's, two key things I'll relate. I'll come to how we got to the valley in a second. But getting started, again, going back to sort of the connections and the relationships in colleges and schools that you make, right? So in terms of funding, right, how do you get funded? Well, at one level, you'd think, we are in a foreign place. I've just been there, I don't know what, like 5, 6 years, right? You're still sorting through things like jobs, visas, etc. So actually, even there, I figured an entrepreneurial thing where, at that time, I don't know if they still do it, but there was this visa category, for green card rather, that there was something called the national interest waiver, which means it's in America's interest to have certain people here, and so long as you can justify and write a nice application, you can kind of get it. And it's like, okay, the odds for this has got to be less than getting into IIT or getting into MIT. So what the hell, so he did that, and sort of that. So that came in quickly. But more than that, when you look for funding, right? At least as IIT alums, and I think these days there's a lot of these networks, but it was, with hindsight, surprisingly easy, right? It really just started with maybe a couple of my friends, and then my co-founder Srini, who was also from IIT Madras, and a couple of his friends, right? So we just talked to them, and they said, sure, we'll invest, and I think they each invested like whatever, 50, 75K, maybe 100K USD. And then the next thing we know, each of them brings in another 3 or 4 friends. And before we knew it, we had like about 50 to 20 people, each putting in like, we ended up with a $1.25 million seed round fairly quickly. And I think we are, so again, I think those connections, there's an implicit trust, there's a lot of referral. You know that people are going to do the right thing. You know that the relationships are far more important than that amount of money and so on. So it's sort of like the money would even come before the paperwork is done, before anything is resolved. I mean, it's just all there. So I think that helped tremendously and immensely. So that was one part, and then we spent a year in New York. One of the reasons why it's really hard to do startups in New York, I think this sort of also applies to Mumbai and so on, is there's a ton of other banks who pay really high salaries, even for the simplest of jobs sometimes. And then you try to hire engineers, and somebody comes in and says, hey, I'm working at Morgan Stanley or Deutsche Bank, and here's what they pay, can you match it? And then the landlord comes and says, okay, do you want a 5-year lease or a 10-year lease? And we're like, how about like a 6-month lease, I don't even know if we'll be around that long. And then the PR firm and the law firm, and everybody's used to, New York is a very cash-rich place and an equity-poor place, right? Valley is the exact opposite. It's equity-rich and cash-poor. People take pay cuts to join startups. Landlords take, stock options instead of rent. Law firms do that too. Employees are very flexible and so on. You don't have to worry about paperwork. You can rent cubes in office space by the week or the day or the month, and then you grow as needed. And the whole ecosystem is very, very favorable, very flexible, because everyone gets it, right? They get it that, look, it doesn't make sense to get startups to commit for very long term. I mean, they need flexibility, fundamentally need flexibility and so on. So everybody gets into the act, and of course, what is it, the wall painter at Facebook or the chef at Google who've made like hundreds of millions of dollars, right? Just because they took stock options instead of like a few $1,000s to do the work. So those kind of stories happen all the time. So anyway, while we were fundraising from New York, we were talking to VCs, again referred by the angel investors who had invested in us. Ultimately, we found most of the VCs in the Valley. You could go, the other thing is the amazing concentration of investors. You could go there, we just went there for a 2-week trip. In the first week, we had about 6 or 7 meetings, from Monday to Thursday. By Friday, you get like about, 3 or 4 requests for a second meeting. And by Tuesday, we had like 2 term sheets in hand and sort of a bidding war going on. And, by Thursday, we kind of closed it out. And in fact, this was another phenomenal story where, so Kleiner Perkins invested, and sort of those of that's one of the most, one of the best venture capital firms, one of the best, most well-known. And John Doerr and Vinod Khosla were kind of out there, and as a young entrepreneur, right, first time entrepreneur and so on. So we already had an offer from Excel, which was also very good, and then then we went to KP because we wanted to do a two-sided deal, get half and half from both funds. But that's not what KP wanted, and they literally kind of locked us in a room and said, okay, why don't we just thrash out a deal here right now? And it was going back and forth and conversations, and we'd said, no, we want to do half and half. I said, no, it doesn't make sense. Look, we'll take the whole thing. And many hours later, we were sitting there for like 5 or 6 hours, and it was a funny conversation. They would tell us, look, KP can add a lot of value, and we're like, yeah, we know that. You guys are really good. So John Doerr, right? He looks at it and says, look, why don't you do some reference checks on us? Like, seriously, we don't need it. Like, no, I insist. I was like, okay. So right there, he sort of takes out a piece of paper and says, okay, how about you talk to Jeff Bezos at Amazon, and you talk to I forget, it was Tim Armstrong at Excite at Home. I'm forgetting some names. And then there was one recent startup that they'd funded. And then Vinod also does the same thing, right, with a few other VCs and so on. And kind of right there, they on speakerphone, they called Jeff, right, who was actually on a flight. And this was all before 9/11, so you could actually connect that way and talk to him. And then we are asking him questions like, do you think John can add more value or Vinod can add more value? It's just like, it was a very, very surreal experience, but it was, because we had to pick a board member, right? So who do you pick and what value would it be? And ultimately we picked John. Many such stories, but ultimately, they funded us. We moved the whole company over from New York to the Valley. We didn't lose a single person in the process, which was a great achievement. And in fact, even the move became a big PR story in Silicon Valley, because they said, oh, this is the modern version of the gold rush. The gold rush was, in the 1800s, and there was the real gold rush, and then this is sort of the metaphorical gold rush. And what we did, right, we handed out like orange t-shirts. Our logo was orange in color. So in the plane, right, so we told the stewardess, so the stewardess announced it on the plane announcement system that, hey, there's a whole company moving out west, we wish them all the best. And then we had some orange t-shirts, so we handed it out to everyone on the plane on the condition that they wore it when they got off the plane. Okay. So, plus we took pictures of the plane, and then using the modem, in-flight modem or something, we uploaded the pictures on our website. So our PR firm contacted, the media organizations in the Valley saying, hey, look, there's a flight coming, these people are in the air, look at the pictures, and then come here and, receive them at the airport. And then when we landed, firstly there were like 200 orange shirts coming out of the plane, and there were like, 3 TV stations, 2 radio stations, a bunch of print reporters, and we were in the evening news. So a lot of people still remember, oh, you are the company that moved. I mean, there were many more that moved, but we were the one known for it,
And whose idea was that?
It was a little bit of a PR firm, but they didn't know what to expect, right? So we started, we saw that modem, and it was I don't even know if you guys know, there was an acoustic coupling, which means these are sound-based connection. It wasn't even an electrical connection and so on. So there was a lot of flaky things. So none of this was organized. It was just kind of on the spur of the moment where it worked out great, yeah.
So moving forward, if you look at it, if I go back to the marketplace, now setting up a marketplace is a tough job, because a supplier would come in only when there's a customer, and customer would come in only when there's a supplier.
Right.
How did you actually went ahead and crack that?
Yeah, that's a great question. This is the classic chicken and egg. In any two-sided marketplace, you need to get to critical mass. Until that happens, it doesn't work. But what you'll usually find is that one side is a lot harder, or conversely a lot easier than the other side. In this case, at least in a services marketplace, what you find is that the providers of services, right, the people who have talent, they're all over the world, and they are very willing to invest time to get listed. For them, it's just a marketing opportunity. So they would jump through a lot of hoops. We learned that very quickly. You send out one email, and the conversion rate would be very, very high in terms of people coming and signing up. So that list would happen very quickly. But on the other side, you needed to get businesses coming and requesting these services or other people doing that. And if they don't, then of course at some point these guys will lose the interest. So that ended up being a lot harder, and that translates into your cost of acquisition on the marketing side. It translates into just lots of work, and with hindsight, we were probably way too ahead of our time. By which I mean, even as people were getting comfortable with the internet, right? See, internet was a new medium, okay? It started with people saying, oh, I won't even send email on the net. Somebody might see it and read it. To somebody said, people saying, oh, I won't use credit cards on the internet because it gets stolen. And there were some fraud cases, but it was not too high. But it's just a mental barrier, right? And then for e-commerce, a lot of those problems got solved by 98, 99 when people got comfortable with, Visa said, okay, we guarantee against all fraud risk and so on, and the companies got together. So that got taken care of. But one of the hardest sets of people, or sort of the laggards, who didn't jump to business very quickly was small businesses in the US. And, I don't know, doctors, dentists, restaurant owners, and hotel owners, and things like that. And those are the people for whom this was meant to be used, because, if you're GE, well, then you call Infosys and you get a captive unit set up and you hire 1,000 people and they do things. But, if you're a restaurant owner that wants to get a logo done, or a consulting firm, that wants to get a website built, or you're a, marketing firm that wants to get some collateral developed and things like that, it's usually for small businesses, and they were not early adopters, Some of the reasons were very valid. They'd say, well, we are used to seeing somebody face to face and working with them, or, it would take too much work to describe their own specification. People don't like that. They, think about it. In real life, you say, Acha, why don't you come over? We'll talk about it. And so it's almost like the service provider figures out the specification and then implements it, rather than, the person who's requesting the job. So that would be very hard. Then, time zone difference, language, even the meanings of words, right? I mean, usually you'll have whatever, I mean, again, generalizing, but let's say Turkish, Brazilian, or Indian developer saying, okay, it's done. Well, done means, okay, it's ready to be previewed and, ready to see the gist of it, but not done as in fully QA, tested, and rock solid. Well, in the US, done would mean like, okay, it's really done and I'm ready to use it, and so on. So there'd be a lot of conflict and so on and so forth. So it took a long time. I mean, I think that was the hard part of business, and we'd have to keep focusing on usability. You simplify usability, focus on marketing. So you look at your cost of acquisition, cost of marketing. Google was emerging as an advertising medium, so that helped a lot as well. And ultimately, it took some time to happen, but eventually it did. To your two-sided question, fortunately, the service providers were always motivated enough, because what happened is you'd always have some success stories. And we'd highlight those, saying, look, if this guy can do it, others can also do it. And here's how they did it, and here's how you win jobs, and here's how you deliver successful projects, and here's how you market yourself and promote yourself and describe yourself. So that's what